The moment the super empath stopped caring, the avoidant started falling apart as bro. You know that moment when the person who's always cared too much finally stops caring? It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, like the air just shifts, and suddenly the one who thought they held all the power realizes they've lost it. We all know someone who gives the emotional anchor, the one who feels deeply, listens patiently, and forgives endlessly. That's the super empath. They see potential in people, not just who they are, but who they could be. And for a long time, that's their strength until it becomes their prison. Because when you care deeply for someone who's avoidant, someone who fears intimacy, who runs when love gets too real, you start believing that if you just love them right, they'll stay. But here's the truth. You can't heal someone by sacrificing your own peace. The moment the super empath stops chasing, stops explaining, stops trying to prove their worth, something shifts. The avoidant, who once felt safe in distance, starts feeling the loss of emotional gravity. They sense the absence of that unconditional love that always caught them. And for the first time, they're the one left wondering. See, it's not that the empaths stopped caring altogether. It's that they started caring for themselves more. They realized that peace is more powerful than pursuit. That silence speaks louder than pleading. That walking away isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And when that happens, the dynamic flips. The avoidant, who once ran from love, starts running toward it, not because the empath demanded it, but because the emptiness finally echoed louder than their fear. So to every super empath listening, the moment you stop caring in the old way, you begin loving in the right way. And that's the moment everything starts to change. When you've spent your whole life being the one who understands, explains, and forgives, silence feels unnatural. You've been conditioned to believe that love is something you constantly demonstrate, that your worth is proven through effort, through showing up, fixing, soothing, and saving. But the truth is, emotional power doesn't come from what you give, it comes from what you're willing to hold back. The moment you stop chasing someone's acknowledgement, stop explaining your value, and stop defending your intentions, the energy in the connection changes. It's subtle but profound. It's the moment when you stop speaking to be heard and start listening to your own quiet knowing. Silence is not the absence of care, it's the presence of self-respect. When you go quiet, you are no longer participating in a dynamic where your emotions are currency. You're no longer paying for someone's affection with your effort. You're no longer begging for peace in a place that thrives on chaos. The person who once depended on your constant reassurance now feels the weight of your absence. They feel the quiet they never thought would come, the kind that doesn't come from punishment, but from peace. It's easy to underestimate how powerful that stillness is, because while you were explaining yourself, defending your heart, or trying to keep the connection alive, the avoidant always felt safe. They could stay distant, knowing you would always be there to bridge the gap. Your emotional energy was the bridge. But when you stop building that bridge, when you finally step back and let silence fill the space, they are forced to face the very thing they've been running from, themselves. The avoidant thrives on predictability. They feel secure when they know you'll always reach out, always understand, always wait. But when that rhythm stops, their control unravels. It's not that they suddenly become aware of how much they care. It's that they begin to feel the discomfort of uncertainty. They start to realize that your energy wasn't infinite. The attention, the empathy, the unconditional love, it all came from a source that required reciprocity, even if you never demanded it. In that silence, you're not trying to manipulate anyone. You're simply refusing to participate in a pattern that drained you. The quiet is your boundary. It's a declaration that your emotional labor is no longer free. And when you choose to be quiet, something incredible happens. The noise of their avoidance becomes clearer. You begin to see how much effort you were putting into maintaining a connection that required you to silence yourself. You start to notice how often you explained things that needed no explanation. You recognize how much of your energy went into keeping someone comfortable while you were constantly uncomfortable. The shift doesn't happen overnight. You might feel guilt at first, guilt for not reaching out, Guilt for not explaining, guilt for not trying one more time. But underneath that guilt is freedom. Because for the first time, you're not negotiating your peace. You're allowing silence to speak for you. And it says everything. I'm no longer available for one-sided love. I'm no longer available for emotional breadcrumbs. I'm no longer available for the version of me that confuses self-abandonment with loyalty. The power of silence isn't about withdrawal. It's about alignment. When you stop talking, you start observing. You begin to see who reaches out, who notices your absence, and who doesn't. You start to see the truth, not the potential you once clung to. The avoidant, who once seemed so composed, starts to feel disoriented. They begin to wonder if you've truly moved on. They start replaying moments, sensing the void your energy once filled. And in that moment, they learn something about themselves, that avoidance isn't control and distance isn't power. When you step back, you don't lose connection, you regain clarity. You stop performing emotional labor and start embodying emotional intelligence. The quiet becomes your strength. It's not about who reaches out first, who apologizes, or who misses whom. It's about realizing that peace doesn't beg to be understood. It just is. And when you embrace that, you stop needing validation from the very people who only valued you when you were trying to prove your worth. There comes a moment in every relationship where love alone isn't enough to hold it together. You can pour every ounce of your empathy into someone, show up with understanding, patience, and endless forgiveness, and still find yourself standing in the same place, emotionally exhausted, waiting for change that never comes. It's a painful truth, but one of the most freeing you'll ever accept. You cannot love someone into healing. No amount of warmth or reassurance can fix the wounds they refuse to face within themselves. Love is powerful, yes, but it is not a substitute for self-work. When you love someone who carries deep emotional walls, someone avoidant, wounded, or guarded, your instinct as an empath is to reach for them even harder. You see their potential. You sense the good in them buried under fear or defensiveness. You believe that if you're just loving enough, patient enough, or kind enough, you can melt the ice. But that belief quietly traps you. It turns your love into a mission instead of a mutual connection. It makes you responsible for a healing journey that was never yours to carry. Love can inspire change, but it cannot create it. The person on the other side has to want to evolve. They have to face their own pain, their own avoidance, their own resistance to vulnerability. If they aren't ready, all your love will do is meet their walls again and again until your heart starts to bruise. It's not that they don't feel your love. It's that fear speaks louder inside them. Fear of intimacy, fear of being seen, fear of losing control. They can't receive what they haven't yet made space for. And that's where the empath often loses themselves. You start mistaking their silence for an invitation to love harder. You confuse their distance with a need for more proof of your devotion. But each time you step closer while they pull away, you're reinforcing a pattern where love means effort and attachment means struggle. You begin to internalize their unavailability as a reflection of your inadequacy, when in reality, it's a reflection of their inner war. You're fighting battles inside them that they haven't even acknowledged exist. Real love doesn't rescue, it respects. It sees someone's pain without trying to erase it for them. It understands that every person has to meet their own shadow, make their own choices, and take responsibility for their healing. When you stop trying to save them, you're not giving up on love. You're giving love the space to be real. Because genuine love is a two-way exchange, not a one-sided project. It grows through mutual vulnerability, not through one person constantly carrying both hearts. There's something deeply transformative about realizing that your empathy is not an endless resource, that being kind doesn't mean being self-sacrificial. When you finally understand this, you begin to set boundaries not out of anger, but out of clarity. You stop romanticizing potential and start honoring reality. You recognize that healing cannot be gifted. It must be chosen. The most loving thing you can sometimes do for someone is step back and allow them to confront themselves without cushioning the impact. It takes courage to love someone enough to let them take responsibility. It means resisting the urge to over-explain, to fix, to soften every hard truth. It means trusting that if the relationship is meant to survive, it will be because both people are showing up, not because you've carried it alone. And in that space, something shifts inside you. You stop trying to love from a place of fear, fear of losing them, fear of not being enough, fear of being too much. You start loving from a place of strength, where your compassion includes yourself. The avoidant may one day realize the depth of what you offered. They may come to see that your love was never the problem. It was their capacity to receive it. But whether they awaken or not, your healing is no longer tied to their progress. Because when you stop trying to love someone into healing, you begin to heal yourself. You start reclaiming your time, your peace, your self-worth, and you understand finally that love is not meant to deplete you. It's meant to expand you, but only when it's shared, not when it's carried alone. There's a quiet strength that comes from choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else first. It doesn't happen in a single moment, but in small, almost imperceptible decisions. The times you say no when you used to say yes, the times you walk away. Instead of explaining your worth, the times you give yourself the compassion you kept giving away. For so long, you might have believed that caring for others more than yourself was noble, that selflessness was a sign of love. But over time, that kind of love begins to hollow you out. You start to realize that constantly putting someone else's needs before your own isn't kindness, it's self-neglect dressed as devotion. Caring for yourself isn't selfish. It's an act of balance, a declaration that your emotional well-being matters just as much as the person you care for. When you begin to prioritize your peace, you're not rejecting others, you're redefining the way you love. Because love without boundaries becomes survival. It becomes a pattern of giving to prove your worth, of saying yes to avoid conflict, of carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. The moment you start placing your energy where it's reciprocated, everything changes. You stop chasing validation and start cultivating peace. When you care for yourself, you begin to see how much of your previous effort was driven by fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of not being enough, fear of losing connection. Those fears made you overextend yourself, made you tolerate inconsistencies, made you stay longer than your peace could afford. But when you turn inward and start nurturing your own needs, those fears start to lose their power. You realize that you don't need to earn love through sacrifice. You don't have to prove your loyalty through endurance. You can love deeply and still choose yourself. Self-care in this context isn't about bubble baths or long walks, though those have their place. It's about emotional boundaries. It's about recognizing when a conversation drains you, when a relationship costs you more than it gives, when your empathy becomes a bridge for someone who refuses to meet you halfway. It's about learning to sit with the discomfort of saying, "This doesn't feel right," and trusting that your intuition isn't betrayal, it's protection. You start to understand that peace isn't something you find outside of yourself, it's something you protect from within. The more you practice this, the more you see how different love feels when it's grounded in self-respect. You stop confusing attachment with affection, intensity with intimacy, and drama with passion. You start craving stability over chaos, consistency over excitement, and honesty over promises. You realize that being loved well doesn't mean being loved endlessly. It means being loved clearly, and that clarity begins with how you treat yourself. When you speak kindly to yourself, when you honor your own limits, when you stop apologizing for needing space, you teach others how to love you too. Ironically, the moment you begin prioritizing your peace is often the moment people who once took your energy for granted start to notice. They feel the shift. You're no longer chasing, no longer available at every emotional call. They may call it distance, but it's actually alignment. You've stopped showing up from guilt and started showing up from choice. You've stopped loving out of obligation and started loving out of authenticity. And that energy is magnetic. Not because it seeks attention, but because it radiates confidence and self-assurance. Caring for yourself doesn't mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the process. It's a different kind of love, one that's rooted in wholeness, not desperation. It teaches you that boundaries aren't walls, but filters. They let in what nurtures you and block what drains you. And as you live from that space, you start to attract relationships that don't demand your sacrifice, but celebrate your balance. Because when you truly care for yourself, you become someone who doesn't just give love, you embody it. The avoidant personality often confuses distance with safety. To them, closeness feels like exposure, and vulnerability feels like a loss of control. When emotions start to deepen, they instinctively pull back. Not because they don't care, but because care feels dangerous. They fear being consumed by someone else's needs or losing their independence in the process. For the empath, this retreat can feel deeply confusing and painful. You're offering love, connection, understanding, and yet the more you give, the further they seem to drift. It feels like rejection, but it's not always about you. It's about their fear of intimacy colliding with your desire for closeness. The empath's first instinct is usually to chase clarity. You want to talk about it, fix it, make sense of it. You write long messages, try to explain your intentions, or reach out just to remind them that you're still there. You believe that if they could just see how genuine your love is, they'd stop running. But for someone avoidant, that reassurance doesn't feel safe. It feels suffocating. The more you reach out, the more they withdraw. The more you try to close the distance, the more they feel the need to escape it. And so an exhausting cycle begins. The empath chases connection, the avoidant seeks distance, and both end up feeling misunderstood. What breaks this pattern isn't more effort, it's space. It's the counterintuitive act of pulling back instead of pushing forward. Avoidants respond not to arguments, not to persuasion, and not to emotional explanations. They respond to absence. When the empath stops reaching out, stops over-communicating, and stops trying to prove their worth, something inside the avoidant begins to stir. The silence that once seemed comforting to them starts to feel unfamiliar. They're used to having the emotional upper hand, used to being the one in control of when to engage or disengage. But when that control no longer guarantees attention, they feel the imbalance shift. This isn't about manipulation or playing games. It's about restoring equilibrium. When the empath steps back, they reclaim their energy and stop feeding a dynamic that thrives on imbalance. That absence creates room for the avoidant to confront what they've been avoiding, their discomfort with closeness, their fear of dependence, and their mistaken belief that detachment equals strength. For the first time, they have to sit with the consequences of their own distance. They begin to realize that emotional safety doesn't come from pushing people away. It comes from learning how to stay present without losing themselves. The empath in this silence learns something too. You start to see that your worth isn't determined by someone's ability to recognize it immediately. You stop needing validation from someone who isn't capable of offering it consistently. You begin to understand that healthy connection doesn't require you to chase it. It should meet you halfway. The quiet becomes a mirror, reflecting not only their avoidance, but your patterns of overgiving. You start to see how often you've equated effort with love and persistence with loyalty, when sometimes the most loving act is to step back and let space speak. For the avoidant, the absence of your energy becomes louder than any conversation could have been. It forces them to feel what they've been avoiding, the loneliness that sits beneath their independence, the ache that hides behind their composure. They begin to miss what they once took for granted, not because they've suddenly changed, but because your silence exposes what your words never could. In the quiet, they start to understand the depth of what they lost, and whether or not they act on that realization, they'll never forget the feeling. The empath's silence doesn't punish, it reveals. It shows the avoidant that love doesn't beg, that connection can't be forced, and that distance doesn't equal control. It also shows the empath that love doesn't have to be a performance of endurance. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make in love is no statement at all. Silence becomes the teacher. To the one who ran and to the one who cared too much. There's a profound shift that happens when a person who has always overgiven in love finally decides to let go. It's not the loud kind of letting go that comes with anger or final words. It's quiet, grounded, and certain. It's the moment when you realize that love doesn't have to be heavy. That connection shouldn't require constant chasing, explaining, or convincing. When you detach not from love itself, but from the need to control its outcome, something inside you softens and strengthens at the same time. That's when real attraction begins, the kind that's rooted in balance, not desperation. Detachment isn't indifference, it's clarity. It's the ability to love someone deeply while also understanding that their actions are their own, not a reflection of your worth. It's knowing that you can care for someone and still protect your peace. When you've been in the habit of over-functioning, giving more, feeling more, doing more, detachment feels like rebellion at first. You've been taught that love means trying harder, that effort equals value, that if you just show enough patience, you'll be chosen. But love built on that belief isn't love, it's labor. And eventually, it drains the very energy that once made you radiant. The moment you stop over-functioning, the energy in the relationship shifts. The avoidant, who once felt secure in your endless pursuit, starts to sense something different, not resentment, but release. They feel the absence of the emotional chase, the quiet where validation used to echo. Detachment forces both people to face what's real. It reveals whether the connection was sustained by genuine reciprocity or by one person carrying the emotional load. The avoidant begins to see that the dynamic they depended on, where they could pull away and still be met halfway, no longer exists. That realization can be jarring. For the empath, detachment is an act of self-realignment. It's remembering that love should flow in both directions, that giving isn't meaningful if it's not received with appreciation. You start to notice how much of your energy used to go into managing someone else's comfort. You recognize that the intensity you mistook for passion was often anxiety, the fear of losing someone who was never fully there. Detachment breaks that pattern. It lets you breathe again. It teaches you that you don't have to grip so tightly to be loved. Sometimes love finds you more easily when your hands are open. As you detach, something magnetic happens. The calm that once felt foreign becomes attractive, not just to others, but to yourself. You're no longer fueled by emotional chaos. You become grounded, self-assured, and peaceful. That energy is powerful. It doesn't demand attention. It commands respect. The avoidant, who once needed distance, starts to notice the change. Your lack of pursuit creates space for them to confront their own emotions. They begin to realize that your connection was never about control. It was about consistency, something they never truly valued until it disappeared. In this space, attraction transforms. It's no longer about intensity, but resonance. The more you detach from needing validation, the more authentic your presence becomes. You're no longer performing love, you're living it. You stop needing someone to choose you because you've already chosen yourself. That kind of energy draws in people who are capable of matching it, emotionally available, secure, and willing to meet you at your level. Detachment, in its purest form, doesn't push love away. It creates the conditions where healthy love can finally thrive. When you no longer overfunction, you send a clear message to the universe and to everyone around you. I am no longer available for one-sided love. I am no longer chasing potential. I am no longer trying to convince someone of my worth. And the moment you step into that energy, everything begins to shift. The avoidant feels it, you feel it, and suddenly the balance returns. Detachment isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of real connection, one built not on fear or effort, but on mutual respect, freedom, and peace. When you finally reach the point where you stop over-explaining, over-giving, and over-caring, you come home to yourself. You start to see that real love doesn't demand you to lose yourself in the process of keeping someone else comfortable. It doesn't require you to chase, convince, or shrink. It asks only that you show up as you are, whole, calm, and grounded. And that's the beauty of the journey from being the super empath who carried everything to the self-aware empath who finally lets go. The truth is, when you stop trying to fix others, you start to heal yourself. When you stop begging for reciprocity, you begin to experience real balance. And when you stop chasing peace in someone else, you finally find it within. The moment you stop caring in the old way, the exhausting, self-abandoning way, is the exact moment you begin loving in the right way. It's not the end of compassion, it's the birth of wisdom. The avoidant may struggle when your energy no longer holds them up, but that's not your burden to carry. Your silence, your detachment, your peace, they all teach more than your words ever could, because you've learned that. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's dependency. And you've outgrown that story. You've evolved into someone who doesn't just understand love, you embody it. The kind that's steady, healthy, and rooted in self-respect. So as you walk away from what no longer serves your heart, remember this, you didn't lose anything by choosing yourself. You simply stopped settling for less than what you give. You stopped pouring from an empty cup and started filling your own. And from that fullness, you'll attract what was always meant for you. Love that feels safe, connection that feels mutual, and peace that doesn't come at the cost of your sanity. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for allowing yourself to feel every word of this message. If you've ever been the one who loved too deeply, who gave too much, or who tried too hard, know that your empathy is your power, not your weakness. You just needed to learn where to place it. So take your power back gently, breathe, stand tall, and walk forward knowing that you don't need to chase love. You are love. Thank you, truly. And remember, peace is not found in their return. It's found in your release.